Perfection sounds like a good goal, but sometimes perfection is just fear wearing a beautiful mask. It tells you to wait, to prepare a little longer, to improve a little more, until one day you realize you've spent years preparing for a life you never actually started. There was once a young painter named Thomas. He lived in a small medieval village surrounded by green hills, old stone houses, and narrow dirt roads. Every morning, before the marketplace became busy, Thomas was already awake, preparing his brushes and mixing his colors. Thomas painted everything around him: mountains, houses, farmers working in the fields, and children playing beside the river. Sometimes he painted faces from memory. Other times, he painted places that existed only in his imagination. Painting was the thing he loved most. But there was something strange about Thomas. Although he painted almost every day, he had never sold a single painting. His small home was filled with them. They leaned against the walls, stood beneath tables, and were stacked beside his bed. Every morning, Thomas looked at his paintings, but instead of feeling proud, he saw everything that was wrong. A mountain wasn't shaped correctly. A face didn't look natural. The light wasn't perfect. The colors weren't exactly how he had imagined them. So, Thomas kept painting and kept painting, but he never showed his work to anyone. He had made himself a promise. He would not sell a painting until he created something perfect. Without realizing it, that promise was slowly becoming a prison. Thomas didn't simply want to paint. He wanted to become someone. He imagined opening a small shop in the village marketplace with a wooden sign above the door bearing his name. Paintings would hang from every wall, and people would come from neighboring villages to see his work. Thomas imagined farmers, merchants, travelers, and even nobles stopping in front of his paintings. He imagined them asking who had created them. He wanted people to know his name. He wanted to become the greatest painter in the village. And there was nothing wrong with that dream. Thomas believed that once people loved his work, they would buy it. And once they bought it, his business would finally begin. So he waited. He waited for the perfect painting, the perfect moment, the perfect confidence, the perfect beginning. But perfect never arrived. One afternoon, Thomas's friend Martin came to visit. Martin had known Thomas since they were children. When he entered the cottage, he stopped. There were paintings everywhere. He picked one up. It showed a peaceful valley beneath a golden sunset. Martin stared at it for a moment, then smiled. "Thomas, this is beautiful." Thomas immediately stood up. "No." Martin looked confused. "No. Look at the mountain." Martin examined the painting. "What about it?" "The shadow." Martin shrugged. "I think it looks fine." Thomas took the painting from him. "The light should fall differently." Martin smiled. "You always say that." Martin looked around the room. "How many paintings have you made?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Maybe 30. "And how many have you sold?" Thomas lowered his eyes. "None." Martin looked at him. "Then, when are you opening your shop?" Thomas smiled. "Not yet." "Why?" Martin asked. Thomas pointed toward the paintings. "I need to make one perfect painting first." Martin looked at Thomas, then at the dozens of paintings around the room. "Maybe you're waiting for something that doesn't exist." Thomas frowned. "I'll know when it's ready." Martin shook his head. "Just don't wait so long that your dream grows old before it begins." Spring became summer. Summer slowly became autumn. And Thomas kept painting. Every morning, every afternoon, every evening, he finished one painting, then another, and then another. But whenever he stepped away from the canvas, the same thought returned. It's not good enough. He painted a beautiful river, but the reflection wasn't perfect. He painted a farmer, but the hands looked slightly wrong. He painted the village at sunset, but the sky didn't look the way he imagined. So he started again, and again, and again. The strange thing was, Thomas was actually becoming better. His hands were becoming steadier. His understanding of light was improving. His colors were becoming richer, and his paintings were becoming more detailed. But Thomas couldn't see his progress. He only saw the distance between his work and perfection, and that distance always seemed enormous. Sometimes, the better Thomas became, the more mistakes he noticed. His skill was growing, but so was his fear of being imperfect. The more he learned, the more impossible perfection seemed. One cold evening, Thomas finished another painting. He placed his brush down and stepped backward. He looked at the canvas. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "No." He walked closer and examined the face, the colors, the shadows, and the background. Thomas found another mistake. His shoulders dropped. He threw the brush onto the table. "Why can't I do this?" He looked around the room. Dozens of paintings surrounded him. Years of effort, months of work, and yet he had nothing to show anyone. No customers, no shop, no reputation, no business, only unfinished dreams. Thomas sat down, and his eyes filled with sadness. Maybe Martin was wrong. Maybe everyone was wrong. Maybe he simply wasn't talented enough. Thomas began gathering his brushes. One by one, he placed them into a wooden box. Then he closed it. For the first time, Thomas seriously considered giving up. Maybe painting wasn't meant for him. Maybe his dream had been too big. And maybe it was time to let it go. The next morning, Thomas sat outside his house. He wasn't painting. He wasn't working. He simply watched people walk through the village. Nearby, an older craftsman named Edmund was repairing a wooden cart. Edmund had known Thomas for years. He looked at him for a moment, then walked over. "Young man, are you all right?" Thomas forced a smile. "Yes." Edmund sat beside him. "You don't look like a man who is all right." Thomas looked toward the ground. After a long silence, he finally said, "I think I should stop painting." Edmund remained calm. "Why?" "Because I'm not good enough." "Not good enough for what?" "To sell." Edmund looked at him. "Have you sold anything?" "No." "Have you opened your shop?" "No." "Have people rejected your paintings?" Thomas hesitated. "No." Edmund smiled. "Then tell me." He paused. "How do you know you've failed?" Thomas had no answer. For the first time, he realized something. He had spent years judging himself for a failure that had never actually happened. Edmund stood up. "Come with me." Thomas followed him to his workshop. Inside were wooden bowls, chairs, tools, and small pieces of furniture. Some looked beautiful, others were rough. Thomas noticed the imperfections immediately. "This one has a crooked edge," Thomas said. Edmund smiled. "Yes." "And this one has a scratch." "Yes." Thomas looked confused. "You kept them?" "Of course." "Why?" Edmund picked up the scratched bowl. "This one taught me how to sand wood." Edmund picked up another piece. "This one taught me how much pressure to use." Then he picked up another. "This one taught me patience." Thomas looked around the workshop. Edmund continued, "When I was young, I wanted every piece to be perfect." Thomas looked at him. "Really?" Edmund laughed. "I ruined more wood than you can imagine." "Then how did you become good?" Thomas asked. Edmund looked at the unfinished pieces. "I stopped asking every piece to prove that I was talented." Thomas remained silent. Edmund continued, "I began asking every piece to teach me something." He placed the bowl back on the table. "That is the difference." Edmund looked at Thomas. "You're trying to make your first paintings look like the work of a man who has painted for 20 years. Thomas looked down at his hands. Edmund continued, "That is not how mastery works. You don't become skilled by waiting until you're ready. You become skilled by doing the work." Edmund led Thomas outside. They walked along an old stone road. Some stones were large. Some were small. Some were cracked. Some were uneven. Edmund stopped. "Look at this road." Thomas looked down. "Do you know how it was built?" Thomas shook his head. "One stone at a time," Edmund said. He pointed toward the castle in the distance. "Imagine a man wanted to build this entire road in one day. He looks at the first stone. It isn't perfect, so he removes it. He places another. It isn't perfect either, so he removes that one." Edmund smiled. "How long do you think it would take him to reach the castle?" Thomas smiled. "He never would." "Exactly." Edmund looked toward the road. "A road isn't built from perfect stones." He looked at Thomas. "It's built from stones, placed one after another." Thomas slowly understood. Edmund continued, "Your paintings are the same. One teaches you color. Another teaches you light. Another teaches you patience. Another teaches you how people see. None of them has to be perfect. They only have to move you forward." Edmund looked at Thomas. Then he said, "Consistency creates what perfection keeps postponing." Thomas said nothing. He simply looked down the long stone road. For the first time, he understood that every imperfect painting could be another stone on the road toward mastery. The next morning, Thomas woke before sunrise. He walked into his workshop. For the first time, he didn't ask himself, "Can I make this perfect?" Instead, he asked, "Can I finish it?" He chose one painting, a simple landscape of the village. Thomas worked carefully. When he noticed a small mistake, he didn't throw the painting away. He corrected it. When another mistake appeared, he learned from it. He kept working, and when the painting was finally finished, Thomas stared at it. It wasn't perfect. He knew that, but it was finished. Thomas wrapped the painting carefully. Then he carried it toward the marketplace. Every step felt uncomfortable. He could feel his heart beating. People might laugh. Someone might criticize it. Someone might say it was ugly. He almost turned around. But then Thomas remembered the stone road. One stone, then another. He took another step, then another. And finally, Thomas entered the marketplace. For the first time, he wasn't waiting for permission from perfection. He was taking action. Thomas placed the painting on his small wooden stall. Then he waited. A farmer walked past. Nothing. A woman carrying bread walked past. Nothing. Two children stopped and looked at the painting. Then they continued walking. Thomas began to feel embarrassed. Maybe Edmund was wrong. Maybe Martin was wrong. Maybe he really wasn't good enough. Then a man stopped. He looked at the painting. He stepped closer and studied the colors. Then he asked, How much? Thomas froze. What? How much for the painting? Thomas looked at the painting, then at the customer. His voice was barely audible. 3 silver coins. The man considered it, then placed 3 coins on the table. Thomas stared at them. They weren't a fortune. They wouldn't make him famous. But someone had chosen his work. Someone had decided it was worth something. Thomas smiled. For the first time, his dream had entered the real world. Not through perfection, through action. That day, Thomas learned something important. You don't need everyone to believe in your work before you begin. Sometimes, you only need to give your work a chance to exist. Thomas returned the next morning. He brought another painting, then another. Some days, he sold 1. Some days, he sold 2. Some days, he sold nothing. And that was important, because Thomas discovered something he had never understood before. Success did not arrive every day. Some paintings were liked, others weren't. Some customers praised his work, others preferred different styles. And sometimes, someone told him, "I don't like this one." At first, those words hurt, but Thomas didn't hide anymore. He listened. He learned. Then, he painted again, day by day, painting by painting. Thomas changed. His hands became more confident. His understanding of color became deeper. His landscapes became richer. His faces became more natural. His paintings became better. Not because he suddenly discovered some hidden talent, but because he kept practicing. One painting taught him something. The next used that lesson. Then another. Then another. And something beautiful happened. The artist Thomas wanted to become was being created by the work Thomas was willing to do. He hadn't become great in one moment. He had become better through ordinary days. Months later, Thomas finally opened the shop he had dreamed about for so long. A simple wooden sign hung above the door. It read, "Thomas, Painter." Nothing grand, nothing perfect, just his name. And that was enough. People entered. Some came to buy. Some came simply to look. Children watched Thomas paint. Farmers brought pictures of their homes. Families asked him to paint portraits. Travelers purchased landscapes to take home. His little shop slowly became part of the village. Then something unexpected happened. People from neighboring villages began hearing about Thomas. His name traveled farther. A painting would leave his shop, then another, then another. Thomas had once wanted to become famous, and now he was. But fame wasn't what made him happiest. What made Thomas happiest was walking into his workshop each morning. He could finally begin without fear. He no longer needed permission from perfection. He understood that starting imperfectly was better than waiting forever. The dream had become real because he had finally stopped waiting. Years passed. Thomas became one of the most respected painters in the region. One afternoon, Martin visited the shop again. He looked around at the beautiful paintings. Then, he noticed something hanging in the back. An old painting. The colors were rough. The proportions weren't perfect. The brushwork was simple. Martin recognized it. Thomas. Thomas turned. "You still have this?" Thomas smiled. "Of course." Martin laughed. "I remember when you said this wasn't good enough." Thomas walked toward the painting and touched the old wooden frame. "I was right." Martin looked surprised. "What?" Thomas smiled. It wasn't good enough. Then he looked at his friend. But it didn't need to be. He paused. It needed to be finished. Martin smiled. Thomas looked at the painting one more time. That painting taught me more than any perfect painting ever could. Perhaps you're waiting too. Waiting until you're confident. Waiting until your work is better. Waiting until you're ready. Waiting until nobody can criticize you. Waiting until you finally feel like the person you want to become. But Thomas learned something that took him years to understand. You don't become confident before you begin. You become confident because you begin. Your first painting may be imperfect. Your first business may be small. Your first video may not be great. Your first attempt may embarrass you. Your first idea may fail. And that's okay. Your first attempt was never supposed to be your masterpiece. It was supposed to be your teacher. Every imperfect attempt gives you information. Every mistake gives you direction. Every repetition builds skill. And every ordinary day you continue takes you a little farther than yesterday. So don't spend your life staring at the blank canvas, waiting for the perfect moment to paint. Pick up the brush. Make the first mark. Finish the first painting. Then make another. And another. Keep moving. Because one day, you may look back at the imperfect work you once wanted to hide. You may see all the mistakes, all the awkward beginnings, all the moments when you thought you weren't good enough, and you may realize something you couldn't see at the time. That imperfect work was teaching you. Every mistake was giving you direction. Every repetition was building your skill. Every finished attempt was moving you forward. The work you once wanted to hide may become the very thing that shows you how far you've come. So don't wait for perfection. Start with what you have. Do the work. Finish it. Learn from it. Then do it again. Because perfection keeps you waiting, but consistency teaches you how to become great. And sometimes, the first imperfect thing you finish is the beginning of everything you wanted.
Thank you for spending your time with us today at Quiet Path. If this story brought peace or perspective to your day, please consider liking the video and subscribing to join us for our next journey.